Welcome to the Crown Stellaris Beverly Hills, ma'am. Are you sure you're in the right place?
Those words, dripping with mockery, would echo through Brandon Whitlock's mind for the rest of his life. Catherine Brooks stepped through the revolving brass doors of the most exclusive hotel in Beverly Hills at exactly 6:47 in the morning, dressed in gray athleisure, white sneakers, and carrying nothing but a phone and a small leather portfolio. Her natural curls were pulled into a half bun, and the only piece of jewelry she wore was a simple stainless steel watch. To anyone watching, she looked like a guest who had wandered down from her room for an early workout, or perhaps someone who had taken a wrong turn on her morning jog. But Catherine Brooks was neither of those things. 42 minutes earlier, in a glass-walled conference room on the 18th floor of a Manhattan office tower, she had signed the final documents on a $4.2 billion leveraged buyout. Her private equity firm, Brooks Meridian Capital, had just acquired the entire Stellaris Hotel Group. 47 properties spanning 12 countries. 11,000 employees. A century of luxury hospitality, now sitting in her portfolio like a polished gemstone. And the very building she was walking into, the crown jewel of the entire chain, the Beverly Hills flagship, was hers in every meaningful sense of the word. She had flown in on a red-eye specifically to do what she always did before any major acquisition went public. She walked the floors. She watched the staff. She sat in the lobbies. She listened to the doormen. She ordered coffee from the baristas. Catherine Brooks believed that you could learn more about a company in 20 minutes of unannounced observation than in 20 hours of scripted board presentations. And she had 8 minutes before the press release went live to the global markets. What she didn't expect was for those 8 minutes to become the most viewed courtroom of public opinion in the hospitality industry's history. Brandon Whitlock had been the head concierge at the Crown Stellaris Beverly Hills for 6 years. He prided himself on what he called his ability to read a guest. He could spot a celebrity hiding behind sunglasses, a prince traveling under an alias, a movie producer who didn't want to be recognized. He could also spot, in his own words to his co-workers, the people who didn't belong. The wedding crashers. The tourists who wanted to gawk at the lobby. The aspiring influencers trying to film a TikTok in the marble atrium. And right now, walking toward his concierge desk in workout clothes and sneakers, was a woman he had already decided did not belong. He didn't see Catherine Brooks. He saw a black woman in athleisure who had, in his mind, almost certainly walked in by mistake. His lips curled into the practiced smile he reserved for these encounters. Polite enough that no one could accuse him of rudeness. Cold enough that the message would be unmistakable. "Good morning," Catherine said warmly, stopping in front of his desk. "I was hoping to ask a few questions about the penthouse suites. I'd love to see the floor plan if that's possible." Brandon's eyebrows rose so slowly it looked almost theatrical. He glanced at her sneakers. He glanced at her phone. He glanced at the empty space behind her where a luggage cart should have been. And then, with the kind of slow exhalation that managers use to communicate exhaustion with someone they consider beneath them, he leaned forward on his elbows. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The penthouses start at $14,000 a night. We're fully booked through the end of the quarter. And we don't typically give tours to non-guests." Catherine tilted her head slightly. Her face remained perfectly neutral, but anyone who had ever worked for her would have recognized the subtle shift in her expression. The one her senior partners called the moment of measurement. She was no longer just observing. She was now cataloging. "I see," she said softly. "And if I were a guest, would you be able to show me?" Brandon let out a quiet laugh, the kind that wasn't really a laugh at all. "Are you a guest, ma'am? I might be considering becoming one. Ma'am, look." He folded his hands together with exaggerated patience. "This is the Crown Stellaris. We have a clientele. We have a standard. I think there might be some other hotels nearby that would be a better fit for what you're looking for. There's a very nice property about 6 blocks east, on Wilshire. A young woman seated on the velvet couch by the fireplace looked up from her phone. She had been scrolling absent-mindedly, but the tone of Brandon's voice made her stop. Slowly, almost without thinking, she raised her phone and began to record. Across the lobby, a doorman named Mateo paused in the middle of straightening a luggage tag. He had heard Brandon use this exact tone before. Many times. With many guests who looked a certain way. He shifted uncomfortably and pretended to study the registration logbook, his hands suddenly very still. And near the bell stand, a 22-year-old bellhop named Jacob Reyes felt his stomach tighten. He had only been working at the Crown Stellaris for 4 months, but he had learned to recognize the warning signs of what was about to happen. He had seen Brandon do this to a Nigerian businessman 3 weeks ago. He had seen him do it to a black couple celebrating their anniversary the week before that. And every single time, Jacob had stood by and said nothing because he needed this job. He needed it badly. His mother's medical bills depended on it. But something about this morning felt different. The woman standing at the concierge desk wasn't flustered. She wasn't apologetic. She wasn't shrinking under Brandon's condescension the way most people did. She was watching him. Studying him. The way a surgeon studies a tumor before deciding exactly where to cut. Catherine Brooks pulled out her phone and glanced at the screen. 6 minutes until the press release went live. She looked back up at Brandon and offered him a small, almost gentle smile. "Why don't we wait a few minutes," she said quietly, "and see if your assessment of me changes?" Brandon Whitlock straightened up behind his concierge desk, the corners of his mouth tightening with irritation. In his 6 years at the Crown Stellaris, no guest, real or imagined, had ever responded to his polite dismissal with such calm defiance. They usually got embarrassed. They usually mumbled an apology and slunk back out through the revolving doors. They usually let him win. But this woman was just standing there, holding her phone, looking at him with the patient curiosity of someone watching a small animal try to climb out of a glass jar. "Ma'am," he said, his voice taking on the slightly clipped tone he used when he wanted to make it clear the conversation was over, "I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here, but I have other guests who need my attention." The lobby was completely empty. Catherine glanced around at the gleaming, vacant marble floor, the unoccupied velvet couches, the silent reception desk where 2 clerks were pretending not to listen. Then she looked back at Brandon and raised one eyebrow with such delicate precision that the young woman recording on the couch had to bite her lip to keep from laughing out loud. "Other guests," Catherine repeated softly. "Of course. I wouldn't want to keep them waiting." Brandon's face flushed a deep, unattractive red. He hated being corrected. He especially hated being corrected by someone he had already decided was beneath him. He reached for the small radio clipped to his lapel and pressed the transmit button with what he hoped was an air of professional authority. "Security to the lobby, please. Non-urgent." The word non-urgent was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. It was the code Brandon used when he wanted security to escort someone out without causing a scene that might disturb the real guests upstairs. Mateo, the doorman, closed his eyes for a brief second and exhaled slowly through his nose. Jacob, the bellhop, took one small step forward, then stopped, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "Ma'am," Brandon continued, his voice now louder, performative, designed to be heard by anyone who might walk in, "I'm going to ask you, politely, to leave the property. If you have business with one of our guests, you can wait outside and we can call up to their room. But you cannot remain in this lobby." Catherine didn't move. She didn't even blink. Instead, she opened the leather portfolio she had been carrying and removed a single sheet of paper. She placed it on the concierge desk, smoothed it out with 2 fingers, and slid it toward Brandon. "Before security arrives," she said, "I'd like you to look at this. Just for a moment." Brandon glanced down at the paper with the air of a man being asked to inspect something distasteful. It appeared to be a printed memo on heavy cream stationery, embossed at the top with a logo he didn't immediately recognize. He read the first 3 lines without really reading them. Then his eyes snapped back to the top of the page and he read it again. This time slowly. The color began to drain from his face by degrees. First from his forehead, then from his cheeks, then from his lips, until his entire face had taken on the pale, waxy appearance of someone who had just been informed of a death in the family. He looked up at Catherine. He looked back down at the paper. He looked at the logo. The Stellaris crest at the top, but underneath it, in smaller font, the words Brooks Meridian Capital Holdings. He looked back up at her face and saw, for the first time, who he was actually looking at. This, he said, his voice now a hoarse whisper, this is from corporate. Yes. This says. I know what it says. I wrote it. Brandon's mouth opened. Then closed. Then opened again. No sound came out. His left hand, the one still holding the radio, was beginning to tremble visibly. The young woman on the couch was now openly recording, her phone held up at chest level, no longer pretending to be discreet. At that exact moment, the elevator doors on the far side of the lobby slid open with a soft chime, and Linda Pierce, the general manager of the Crown Stellaris Beverly Hills, stepped out. Linda was a tall, elegant woman in her 50s, dressed in a charcoal suit with a silk blouse, her silver hair pulled into a sleek chignon. She had been at the property for 11 years and was, by every metric the corporate office tracked, one of the highest performing general managers in the entire Stellaris portfolio. She was walking briskly toward the executive offices, already mid-sip on her morning espresso, when her eyes fell on the figure standing at the concierge desk. She stopped so abruptly that a small wave of espresso splashed over the rim of her cup and onto the marble floor. The cup slipped from her fingers and shattered, the sound exploding through the silent lobby like a gunshot. Every head turned. Linda didn't notice. She was staring at Catherine Brooks with the expression of a woman watching a tidal wave crest over the horizon and realizing she had nowhere to run. She had seen that face before. 3 months ago. In a quarterly board presentation in New York. In the front row, taking notes, asking questions that had made the previous CEO sweat through his shirt. "Oh my God," Linda whispered, just loud enough for Brandon to hear. "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." She began walking toward the concierge desk, her heels clicking unevenly on the marble, her face the color of fresh paper. Brandon turned to look at his boss, his expression that of a drowning man searching for a life preserver. "Linda," he said, "Linda, this woman is." But Linda wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Catherine. And she was already starting to apologize before she had even crossed the room. Linda Pierce crossed the lobby in 11 brisk steps, her heels announcing her panic with every click against the marble. She passed the broken espresso cup without a glance, leaving it where it had shattered. By the time she reached the concierge desk, her professional composure had been hammered into something unrecognizable. Her hands were trembling. A thin sheen of sweat had appeared along her hairline. The carefully applied lipstick she had put on at 5:30 that morning suddenly looked too bright against her pale face. "Ms. Brooks," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the second syllable. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Ms. Brooks. I had no idea you would be visiting the property this morning. I would have personally met you at the door. I would have arranged a private breakfast in the chairman's suite. I would have." She trailed off, because she had finally registered the scene in front of her. The empty lobby. The young woman on the couch with her phone raised. The doorman frozen by the entrance. The bellhop standing rigid by the bell stand. And Brandon Whitlock, her head concierge, the man she had personally hired and personally promoted twice, standing behind his desk with his hand still hovering near the radio he had used to call security on the new owner of the entire hotel chain. "Brandon." Linda's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Brandon, what have you done?" Brandon opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the printed memo still sitting on his desk. He looked at Catherine. He looked at Linda. The wheels in his mind were turning frantically, searching for the spin, the reframe, the version of this story in which he was still the hero. He had spent 6 years perfecting the art of controlling narratives at this concierge desk. Surely, he could control this one too. Linda, he began, his voice taking on the practiced reasonableness he reserved for moments of crisis, there's been a misunderstanding. Ms. Brooks here came in dressed for a workout, and naturally I assumed. You assumed. Catherine's voice cut through his sentence like a scalpel. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was simply precise. Please. Continue. I would love to hear what you assumed, Brandon. Out loud. For the record. Brandon's jaw worked silently. He glanced at the young woman on the couch, who had now stood up and was walking slowly closer, her phone held steady. He glanced at Mateo by the door, who was no longer pretending to study the registration log. He glanced at the 2 clerks behind the reception desk, who had abandoned all pretense of working and were now openly watching him. I assumed, he said carefully, that you might have wandered in by mistake. The hotel is very large. Tourists sometimes confuse it with the convention center next door. Catherine smiled. It was not a kind smile. Brandon. The convention center is 1.5 miles from here. There is no convention center next door. There is a Cartier boutique next door. Try again. A small, strangled sound escaped Linda's throat. She stepped between Brandon and Catherine like a referee stepping between boxers, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Ms. Brooks. Catherine. Please. Whatever Brandon said, whatever happened here, I take full responsibility. As the general manager of this property, the conduct of my staff is my conduct. I will personally handle this. I will personally apologize. Linda, Catherine said softly, I appreciate that. I truly do. But I'd like to give Brandon the opportunity to apologize for himself. Brandon, she turned back to him, would you like to apologize? This was the moment. Every person in the lobby felt it. The pivot point. The single instant in which Brandon Whitlock could have saved his entire career with 3 words. I am sorry. That was all. 3 words, delivered with sincerity, and Catherine Brooks, who had built her reputation in private equity not on cruelty but on calibration, would have logged the moment, made a quiet recommendation to HR for additional training, and moved on to her next observation. But Brandon Whitlock, in that moment, made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He looked at Catherine Brooks. He looked at Linda Pierce. He looked at the printed memo on his desk, the one from corporate, the one with the Brooks Meridian logo. And he made the calculation that he had made 1,000 times before in his life. The calculation that men like him made instinctively, without ever needing to think about it. Surely this was a misunderstanding that could still be turned around. Surely this woman wasn't actually who that piece of paper said she was. Surely there had been a clerical error, a confusion, a similarity of names. Surely the world he had always known, the world in which he was right and women like her were wrong, was still the world he was standing in. With respect, Brandon said, his chin lifting slightly, I was doing my job. I was protecting the property. Ms. Brooks, whoever she is, was unable to provide a reservation, was dressed in a manner inconsistent with our standards, and was making demands inappropriate for a non-guest. I followed protocol. Linda made a sound like she had been physically struck. Brandon, stop. Stop talking. Right now. No, Linda. He shook his head, almost smiling now, the smile of a man who has convinced himself he is winning an argument that everyone else in the room can see he has already lost. I won't be made the villain here. This woman walked into our lobby with no reservation, no luggage, no. Brandon. Catherine's voice was now glacial. Look at me. He looked at her. I have a reservation. I made it 3 weeks ago. Under my own name. The penthouse suite. For 4 nights. The reservation includes a private dinner in the chairman's suite tomorrow evening for the regional management team. Linda, would you care to confirm that? Linda's hands had begun to shake so badly she had to grip the edge of the concierge desk to steady herself. She looked down at the computer screen, typed 3 letters with trembling fingers, and her face went, somehow, even paler than before. "It's there," she whispered. "It's all there." Brandon Whitlock stared at the computer screen Linda had just turned toward him. The reservation glowed back at him in clean black text on a white background. Brooks, Catherine M., Penthouse Suite 4701. Check-in date, today. Length of stay, 4 nights. Special arrangements, private dining, chairman's suite, 16 guests, regional executive team. Booking confirmed by Linda Pierce, General Manager. Personal courtesy reservation. The note at the bottom of the reservation was the part that made the floor feel as though it were tilting beneath his feet. VIP status, Tier 1. Owner class. Authorized to override all property protocols. Owner class. Brandon had only ever seen that designation twice in his entire career. Once for the previous chairman of the Stellaris Group, who had stayed at the property for his 80th birthday. Once for a Saudi prince who owned 12% of the parent company's preferred shares. Owner class meant the guest was, in some literal corporate sense, an owner of the building they were standing in. His mouth had gone completely dry. His tongue felt swollen. He tried to speak and produced only a small, papery sound. He managed. "You what, Brandon?" Catherine asked. Her voice was soft, almost conversational, the way a parent might speak to a child who had just been caught in a lie. "You followed protocol. Tell me, what protocol covers refusing entry to the chairwoman of the company that owns the hotel?" A small, awful silence opened up in the lobby. The young woman with the phone had moved to within 10 feet of the concierge desk now, her recording uninterrupted, her face a mask of fascinated horror. 2 new people had wandered in from the breakfast restaurant and stopped halfway across the lobby, sensing that something significant was happening even if they didn't yet understand what. Brandon's eyes darted to the printed memo on his desk. The one Catherine had slid toward him. He hadn't actually read past the first few lines. He had seen the Stellaris crest, the Brooks Meridian logo, the words acquisition and chairwoman, and his mind had short-circuited before processing the rest. Now, with shaking fingers, he picked it up and forced himself to read it properly. The memo was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph announced the completion of the $4.2 billion leveraged buyout of the Stellaris Hotel Group by Brooks Meridian Capital. The second paragraph introduced the new ownership structure and the appointment of Catherine M. Brooks as chairwoman and chief executive officer of the combined entity. The third paragraph thanked all 11,000 Stellaris employees for their continued service and assured them that the new ownership was committed to preserving the legacy of excellence that had defined the brand for over a century. At the bottom, in the elegant signature line, were the words Catherine M. Brooks, chairwoman and CEO, Stellaris Hotel Group. The press release was scheduled to go live to the global financial markets in 4 minutes. Brandon set the memo down very carefully, as though it were a fragile object that might shatter if handled roughly. He looked up at Catherine. The smug expression he had worn 6 minutes ago had been entirely scrubbed from his face, replaced by something raw and frightened. The expression of a man who has just realized he is standing in quicksand and has been struggling, all this time, only to sink faster. "Ms. Brooks." His voice came out as a whisper. "Ms. Brooks, please. I didn't know." "You didn't know what, Brandon?" "That I owned the hotel. Or that I deserved basic human courtesy regardless." He flinched. The question was a trap, and he knew it. There was no answer that would not make things worse. So he chose the only answer left to a man drowning in his own choices. He chose to beg. "I have 3 children." His voice cracked. "I have a mortgage. My wife is in nursing school. Please, please, I will do anything." I will apologize to you on my knees right here in this lobby. I will write you a letter. I will. Brandon. Catherine's voice was gentle now, which was somehow worse than when it had been cold. Stop. Please. Don't humiliate yourself further. It isn't necessary. She turned away from him then, deliberately, the way a doctor turns away from a patient whose condition has become clear and whose treatment plan no longer requires the patient's input. Her eyes scanned the lobby slowly, taking in each face. The young woman with the phone, who lowered it slightly when their eyes met. Mateo by the door, who straightened reflexively. The two reception clerks, who looked down at their keyboards. Linda Pierce, who looked as though she might actually faint. And then, finally, her eyes landed on Jacob Reyes, the 22-year-old bellhop standing very still beside the bell stand. He hadn't moved during the entire exchange. He hadn't filmed. He hadn't smirked. He hadn't joined in. But he had also done one small thing that Catherine had noticed the moment it happened. About 3 minutes ago, while Brandon was reaching for his radio, Jacob had quietly walked to the side cabinet where complimentary water bottles were kept for guests. He had retrieved a single chilled bottle, walked over to Catherine, and placed it gently on the corner of the concierge desk in front of her. He hadn't said a word. He hadn't drawn attention to himself. He had simply made a small, silent gesture that said, "I see you. You are a guest in this hotel. You deserve a glass of water." Then he had walked back to the bell stand and resumed his position, his face carefully neutral, his hands clasped behind his back. Catherine looked at him now. Really looked at him. He met her gaze for half a second, then dropped his eyes to the floor, the way employees are trained to do when senior figures look at them directly. But Catherine had already filed the moment away. The young man with the water bottle. The only person in this entire lobby who had behaved with grace. "Jacob," she said. She had read his name tag from across the room. "Would you come over here for a moment, please?" Jacob's head snapped up. He looked at Linda for permission. Linda, still gripping the concierge desk, nodded weakly. Jacob walked across the marble floor with the careful stride of a young man who has just realized he has been summoned into the most important conversation of his life and has no idea why. Jacob Reyes stopped 3 respectful feet from Catherine Brooks and clasped his hands in front of him in the formal posture he had been taught during his orientation 4 months earlier. Up close, he looked even younger than 22. His uniform was immaculate, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, his bellhop cap tucked under his left arm. He had the slightly hollow-cheeked look of someone who didn't always eat regular meals, and the wary eyes of someone who had learned early in life that being noticed by people in positions of power could go either way. "Yes, ma'am," he said. His voice was steady, but only just. "Jacob, what's your last name?" "Reyes, ma'am." "How long have you worked at this property, Jacob Reyes?" 4 months and 1 week, ma'am." "And before this?" He hesitated. "I worked at a car wash on Pico Boulevard, ma'am. For about 2 years. Before that, I was in high school." Catherine nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "Jacob. A few minutes ago, while a member of this staff was treating me as though I were trespassing in this lobby, you walked over and placed a bottle of water on the desk in front of me. Do you remember doing that?" Jacob's eyes widened slightly. He had not expected her to notice. He had not expected anyone to notice. He had performed the small gesture not with any plan, not with any expectation, but simply because his grandmother had raised him with one ironclad rule. When you see someone being treated badly, you find a small way, any way, to remind them they are still a human being. The water bottle had been the only thing within his reach. "Yes, ma'am," he said carefully. "I remember. Why did you do it?" He hesitated again. The honest answer felt dangerous. The dishonest answer felt worse. "Because you looked like a guest who hadn't been offered any water yet, ma'am." Catherine's mouth curved into the first genuine smile she had worn since walking through the revolving doors. It was a small smile, almost private, but it transformed her entire face. That's a very diplomatic answer, Jacob. I suspect it's also not the whole truth. Would you like to tell me the whole truth? Jacob looked down at the floor for a long moment. When he looked up again, there was something different in his eyes. A kind of quiet resolve. Ma'am. I did it because what was happening to you wasn't right. And I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't say anything because I'd lose my job, and I have my mother to take care of. But I could give you a bottle of water. So I did. The lobby was so silent now that Catherine could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Thank you, Jacob, she said quietly. Thank you for telling me the truth. And thank you for the water. She turned then, slowly, and faced Linda Pierce. The general manager was still gripping the edge of the concierge desk like a woman holding onto a railing in a storm. Her professional composure had not returned. Her eyes were wet, though no tears had fallen yet. Linda. Yes, Ms. Brooks. In approximately 90 seconds, the press release announcing my acquisition of the Stellaris Group will go live to every major financial news outlet in the world. Within 15 minutes, every general manager in our 47 properties will receive a personal welcome letter from me, along with a confidential set of expectations for the transition period. Within an hour, the stock price of our publicly traded subsidiaries will begin to react. Within 24 hours, every employee of this company will know my name and will form their first impression of what kind of leadership they can expect from me. Linda nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. Linda. The first impression they form is going to be shaped, in significant part, by what happens in this lobby in the next 10 minutes. By how we, all of us standing here, choose to handle this situation. Do you understand? Yes, Ms. Brooks. I understand. Good. Catherine turned slightly so that she was addressing the entire lobby now, not just Linda. Her voice carried, calm and clear, to every corner of the marble atrium. I want to be very precise about something, because I suspect this story is going to be told many times in the coming days, and I'd like the record to be accurate. She paused. Every person in the lobby, including the two newcomers from the breakfast restaurant, was now openly watching her. I did not come into this hotel this morning to catch anyone doing anything wrong. I came in because I do this at every property I acquire. I walk the floors. I observe the staff. I form my own impressions before the official introductions happen. In 95% of the properties I have visited in my career, this exercise produces nothing more than a few interesting notes about workflow and customer service. She turned her head and looked at Brandon, who was now sitting heavily in the chair behind his concierge desk, his head in his hands. In rare cases, the exercise reveals something more significant. A pattern. A culture. A character, in the old-fashioned sense of the word. The character of a person, the character of a property, the character of an organization. She let the word settle. Brandon Whitlock did not just have a bad morning. Brandon Whitlock did not just make a mistake. Brandon Whitlock did exactly what he has been doing, in this lobby, for years. The question I have for you, Linda, is this. How is it possible that this behavior has continued, in this hotel, under your management, for as long as it has? Because I find it very difficult to believe that I am the first guest to have experienced it. Linda closed her eyes. She did not answer. She did not need to. Linda Pierce opened her eyes slowly. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet that Catherine had to lean forward slightly to hear her. Ms. Brooks. There have been complaints. There have been incidents. 3 formal ones in the last 2 years. Several informal ones. I've spoken to Brandon. I've put notes in his file. I've sent him to 2 diversity training sessions. I told myself each time that he had heard the message. I told myself each time that the next incident would be the last. She drew in a long, shaking breath. I was wrong. I was wrong every time. I should have terminated him 18 months ago. I didn't, because he was the highest-rated concierge on every guest satisfaction survey, and because the guests who complained were always. She trailed off. She didn't have to finish the sentence. Catherine finished it for her. Were always people who looked like me. Linda nodded. A single tear escaped down her cheek. Yes. And you chose the survey scores. Yes. Even though the survey scores were inflated by the very behavior you were ignoring. Because the guests Brandon was filtering out before they ever reached your registration desk were never around to fill out a survey. Linda let out a small, broken sound. She had clearly never framed it to herself in those terms, and the framing landed on her with the weight of a verdict. Catherine looked at her for a long moment. There was no triumph in her expression. There was only a tired, steady recognition. She had seen this exact pattern, in exactly this configuration, in dozens of acquisitions across her 20-year career. It was never one bad employee. It was always a system. Always a manager who looked the other way. Always a metric that rewarded the wrong thing. Always a culture that protected the protector and erased the harmed. Behind her, the young woman with the phone had quietly lowered the device and was now standing with it pressed against her chest, her face wet with tears she hadn't realized she was crying. The two newcomers from the breakfast restaurant had not moved. Matteo, the doorman, was staring at the marble floor with a clenched jaw, his shoulders trembling slightly. The two reception clerks had their hands frozen above their keyboards. Catherine's phone buzzed once in her hand. She glanced down at it. The press release had gone live. Somewhere in a server farm in New Jersey, the formal announcement of the $4.2 billion acquisition was being pushed simultaneously to Bloomberg, Reuters, The Wall Street Journal, The Financial Times, and every major business news outlet in 12 languages. By the time she set her phone back down, her name had already been published, in connection with this hotel, in approximately 40,000 places on the internet. Linda, she said. Here is what is going to happen. I am going to give you a series of instructions. You are going to follow them. If at any point you have a question, you may ask. If at any point you wish to disagree, you may speak. But you are going to follow them. Do we understand each other? Yes, Ms. Brooks. Good. First instruction. Brandon Whitlock is suspended, effective immediately, pending a formal HR investigation that will commence today. He is not terminated. I want to be very clear about that. He is suspended. A small, confused murmur ran through the lobby. Brandon lifted his head from his hands, a flicker of something that might have been hope crossing his face. Second instruction. The investigation will examine, at minimum, every guest complaint filed against Brandon in his entire tenure at this property, every survey response that mentioned him by name, and every internal note placed in his personnel file. The investigation will be conducted by an outside firm I will personally select, not by your in-house HR team. Linda nodded. Third instruction. At the conclusion of the investigation, which I expect to be approximately 90 days, Brandon will be terminated for documented bias and pattern violations, with cause. There will be no severance. There will be no neutral reference. There will be no quiet exit. There will be a documented record. Brandon's brief flicker of hope died. He sank back into his chair. Fourth instruction. During those 90 days, Brandon will not return to the concierge desk. He will instead serve in a support capacity at this property, performing the kind of work he has historically considered beneath him. He will report directly to a new acting general manager position that I am about to create. Linda blinked. A new acting general manager position? Yes. To replace me? Catherine looked at her steadily. Linda. I am not going to replace you. Not yet. I am going to give you a chance, exactly one chance, to demonstrate that you can be the leader this property deserves. You will continue as general manager. But for the next 90 days, you will work alongside an acting GM whose specific role will be to rebuild the culture of this lobby. You will treat that person as your equal in matters of staff conduct. You will support them publicly. You will defer to their judgment on personnel issues. And at the end of 90 days, both of your performances will be reviewed. Linda swallowed hard. I understand. Fifth instruction. Catherine turned her head slowly and looked directly at Jacob Reyes, who was still standing in the same spot, his hands clasped, his face a careful mask of professional neutrality. Jacob. Step forward, please. Jacob took a single step forward. His face did not change, but his eyes had gone very wide. Jacob Reyes. I am offering you, effective immediately, the position of acting general manager of the Crown Stellaris Beverly Hills, for a probationary period of 90 days. The position comes with a corresponding salary, full benefits, executive training support, and a personal mentor from the corporate executive team. At the end of 90 days, the position will either become permanent or you will be returned to your current role with a full year of severance, your choice. The lobby went absolutely still. Jacob stared at her. His mouth opened slightly. No sound came out. Ma'am, he finally managed. Ma'am, I'm 22 years old. I haven't finished college. I have no management experience. I'm a bellhop. Catherine smiled. It was the same small, private smile from before. Jacob. I am not promoting you because of your resume. I am promoting you because you were the only person in this lobby who behaved with character when there was no reward for doing so, and no penalty for not doing so. Character, Jacob, is what people do when no one is watching and no one is going to thank them. Everything else can be taught. Jacob Reyes did not move for several long seconds. His eyes remained fixed on Catherine Brooks, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and the beginning of an emotion he didn't yet have a name for. The marble lobby, which only 20 minutes ago had felt like a place of judgment and humiliation, now felt to him like a room he was seeing for the first time. Ma'am. His voice came out hoarse. He cleared his throat and tried again. Ma'am, with all due respect, I don't know how to be a general manager. I don't even know what most of them do. I see them in their offices. I see them in meetings. I don't know what happens in those meetings. Jacob. Catherine's voice was patient, the same tone she had used in her firm to coach junior analysts through their first board presentations. I am not asking you to walk into Linda's office tomorrow and run a budget meeting. I am asking you to do what general managers, the good ones, actually do. Which is to walk through this property every day and make sure that every single person who works here, and every single person who stays here, is treated with dignity. The financial work, the operational work, the procurement work, all of that, Linda will continue to handle and will teach you over time. Your job, for the next 90 days, is the human work. She paused. I am going to assign you a personal mentor from my executive team. Her name is Yvonne Carter. She has 30 years of hospitality experience and started her own career as a housekeeper at a Marriott in Atlanta. She will be on a plane to Los Angeles by lunchtime. She will work alongside you every day for the next 90 days. You will not be alone. Jacob's lower lip trembled, just once, before he caught it. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. I accept. A small, unexpected sound came from the back of the lobby. Mateo, the doorman, was clapping. Slowly, almost hesitantly, but clapping. After a moment, one of the reception clerks joined him. Then the other. Then the young woman with the phone, who had been wiping her face with the back of her hand. Then the two newcomers from the breakfast restaurant. The applause was not loud. It was not theatrical. It was the quiet, halting applause of people who were realizing in real time that they had just witnessed something they had never expected to see in a Beverly Hills hotel lobby. The applause built slowly until even Linda Pierce, her shoulders shaking, was clapping too. Brandon Whitlock did not clap. He was sitting very still in the chair behind his concierge desk, his face the color of cold ash, watching a 22-year-old bellhop he had once mocked behind the bell stand receive a promotion that he himself, after 16 years in hospitality, had never been considered for. Catherine raised one hand, and the applause subsided. "Sixth instruction," she said. She turned to face Brandon. "Brandon. Stand up, please." Brandon stood. His knees nearly buckled, but he stood. "For the next 90 days, until your termination, you will report directly to Jacob Reyes. You will address him as Mr. Reyes. You will perform whatever duties he assigns you, within the scope of the property's normal operations. You will not push back. You will not negotiate. You will not appeal. If at any point during these 90 days you behave toward Mr. Reyes, or toward any guest, or toward any member of this staff, in a manner inconsistent with the dignity I have just described, your termination will be immediate, will be public, and will be accompanied by a full release of the surveillance footage from this lobby this morning. Do you understand?" Brandon's mouth moved. No sound came out at first. "Yes," he finally whispered. "Yes, what?" His head dropped. "Yes, Ms. Brooks. Look at Mr. Reyes when you answer. He is your supervisor now. Address him." Brandon turned his head slowly. He looked at Jacob, who was standing there, this 22-year-old bellhop who had not asked for any of this, who was now being thrust into a power dynamic he had not chosen but had earned. And in Brandon's face, in that moment, was every layer of the assumption that had defined his entire morning. The assumption that the world had a certain shape. The assumption that certain people belonged in certain positions and certain people did not. The assumption that a black bellhop and a black woman in athleisure were two variations on the same fundamental category of person who could safely be dismissed. The assumption was now sitting in front of him as his new boss, and as the new owner of his employer. "Yes," Brandon said hoarsely. "Yes, Mr. Reyes. I understand." Jacob nodded once. His face was carefully neutral. Whatever he was feeling in that moment, he kept it private. It was, Catherine noted with quiet satisfaction, exactly the right response. The response of someone who already understood that leadership was not about the moment of triumph but about what you did with it. Catherine turned back to face the lobby at large. "One last thing," she said. "I want everyone in this room to hear me clearly. What happened in this lobby this morning will not be hidden. It will not be buried in an internal report. It will not be settled with a non-disclosure agreement. The video recordings that some of you have made will be released, with my permission and with the permission of every staff member visible in them, as part of a public statement that the Stellaris Hotel Group will issue later this week. The statement will not be a defensive statement. It will be a transparent statement. It will say what happened, who did what, and what the consequences are. It will be signed by me." She let that settle. "I am doing this for one reason. Because the only way to break the kind of cycle you have all witnessed this morning is to refuse to participate in the cover-up that usually follows it. Hotels like this one survive on reputation. Reputations survive on silence. I am ending the silence in our company today, in this lobby, with my own name attached. The cost of doing so will be reflected in our stock price for approximately 48 hours. The benefit of doing so will be reflected in our culture for the next 20 years. Linda Pierce was openly weeping now. She made no effort to hide it. Catherine Brooks gave the lobby one final look, the kind of look a builder gives to a foundation she has just finished pouring. Then she turned to Linda Pierce, who was wiping her cheeks with the edge of her sleeve. "Linda. I do still have a reservation. I do still intend to use the penthouse. I have a regional management dinner tomorrow night that I am not canceling, because I want every general manager from our western properties to walk into this hotel, into this lobby, and feel exactly the energy of what just happened here. I want them to ask their own questions. I want them to look at their own concierge desks. I want them to go home and look at their own personnel files." Linda nodded. In the meantime, I would like to be shown to my suite. I would like a pot of coffee. I would like Yvonne Carter to be picked up at LAX and brought directly here when she lands. And I would like the next 2 hours to make some phone calls. Mr. Reyes. Jacob straightened. Yes, ma'am. You will accompany me to the penthouse. Not as a bellhop. As my acting general manager. We have a great deal to discuss before lunch. Bring a notepad. Jacob set his bellhop cap down carefully on the bell stand. The simple, unhurried gesture carried more weight than any speech could have. He did not look at Brandon. He did not look back at the staff who had watched him be promoted past them. He simply walked over to the small employee station near the reception desk, retrieved a leather portfolio identical to Catherine's own, slipped a pen into the inside pocket and returned to her side. I'm ready, ma'am. Then let's go. Catherine turned toward the elevator bank, then paused. She looked over her shoulder at Brandon Whitlock one final time. He had not moved from behind his concierge desk. He was staring at the polished marble floor as though he hoped it might open beneath his feet and swallow him whole. Brandon. He looked up. His eyes were red. For the next 90 days, every morning at 6:30, you will report to Mr. Reyes for your daily assignments. You will dress in the staff uniform, not the concierge blazer. The brass nameplate will be retired from your desk this morning. The desk itself will be reassigned tomorrow. Your locker will be relocated to the general staff area. Linda will arrange the details. Are there any questions? Brandon shook his head slowly. Use words, please, Brandon. We are professionals here. No, Ms. Brooks. No questions. Good. She turned, and with Jacob walking half a step behind her in the careful, measured way he had been taught to walk behind important guests, she crossed the lobby toward the elevator. The brass doors slid open with a soft chime. Catherine stepped inside. Jacob stepped in beside her. The doors closed. For approximately 11 seconds, the lobby remained completely silent. Then, almost in unison, every person in the room exhaled. The young woman with the phone sank down onto the velvet couch as though her legs would no longer support her. Mateo, the doorman, leaned heavily against the brass frame of the revolving door. The two reception clerks looked at each other and burst into a kind of nervous, uncontrollable laughter, the laughter that follows the breaking of a long-held tension. Linda Pierce sat down in the chair at the concierge desk, the one Brandon had been sitting in moments before, and put her face in her hands. Brandon Whitlock simply stood there. His world, the entire shape and architecture of his world, had collapsed in approximately 14 minutes. He had walked into the hotel that morning believing himself to be the master of a small kingdom. He was leaving the same hotel that morning, in some literal sense, the property of a kingdom he had not even known existed. Inside the elevator, ascending the 47 floors to the penthouse, Catherine Brooks did not speak for the first 30 seconds. She watched the floor numbers climb. Then she turned slightly to look at Jacob. Jacob. Are you all right? He swallowed. I don't know yet, ma'am. That is the correct answer. Anyone who told me they were fine, in this moment, would be lying to themselves. I want you to understand something. Are you listening? Yes, ma'am. What I have just done to you is not entirely a kindness. I have placed you in a position that is going to be extraordinarily difficult. There are going to be people in this company, and there are going to be people in this industry, who will not believe you deserve this position. They will say I promoted you for optics. They will say you are a token. They will say you got lucky in a viral moment. Some of them will say it loudly. Most of them will say it in private. All of them will be watching you very, very closely for the next 90 days, hoping you fail. She paused. You are going to have to be twice as good as anyone else in your position would have to be, just to be considered competent. You are going to have to absorb criticism that is unfair, and absorb it without flinching. You are going to have to make decisions, hard decisions, with the full knowledge that some of them will be wrong, and that the wrong ones will be remembered while the right ones will be ignored. Do you understand what I am telling you? Jacob nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. I understand. You understand because you have already lived it. You have been doing twice the work for half the recognition for your entire life, just to be considered worth keeping around. The only thing that has changed today is the size of the stage. Jacob's eyes filled briefly. He blinked hard. He did not let the tears fall. Yes, ma'am. Good. One more thing. The mentor I am sending you, Yvonne Carter. She is not going to coddle you. She is going to be harder on you than anyone else, because she knows exactly what you are about to face. You will hate her some weeks. You will be grateful for her every other week. By the end of 90 days, she will be the most important professional relationship of your life. Trust her. Even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open onto the marble foyer of the penthouse suite. The penthouse suite of the Crown Stellaris Beverly Hills occupied the entire 47th floor. The foyer alone was larger than most apartments, with 12-foot ceilings, a Carrara marble floor inlaid with a custom compass rose, and a curved staircase leading up to a private rooftop terrace. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the entire western horizon, from the Hollywood Hills in the north to the distant blue suggestion of the Pacific Ocean in the south. At 6:50 in the morning, the light coming through those windows was the soft, golden, almost forgiving light that Los Angeles produces for approximately 40 minutes a day before the haze burns it off. Catherine Brooks walked into the suite, set her leather portfolio down on the entry console, and turned in a slow circle, taking in the space. Jacob Reyes hesitated at the threshold. Come in, Jacob. This is your hotel now too. He stepped inside carefully, the way a person steps into a museum after hours. He had been a bellhop at this property for 4 months and had never been past the reception desk on the 47th floor. Sit down. Catherine gestured to one of the deep cream-colored armchairs near the window. We are going to be here for a while. Jacob sat. He opened his leather portfolio and clicked his pen. Catherine almost smiled. You can put that away for the first part of this conversation. Jacob set the pen down. She crossed the suite to the small writing desk near the window, picked up the in-room phone, and dialed a 4-digit extension. Within 90 seconds, a member of the in-room dining staff was at the door with a silver tray bearing a French press, 2 porcelain cups, a small pitcher of cream, a bowl of brown sugar, and a plate of fresh croissants. The staff member, a young woman whose name tag read Adriana, set the tray down on the coffee table between them, executed a small bow, and looked up just long enough to recognize Jacob. Her eyes widened. She glanced at Catherine. She glanced back at Jacob. Whatever she had heard in the staff break room in the last 15 minutes had clearly already begun to circulate. Mr. Reyes, she said carefully. The honorific landed strangely on both of their ears. Adriana, Jacob said. His voice was soft. Thank you. She bowed again and left. Catherine poured the coffee. She handed 1 cup to Jacob and kept 1 for herself. She took a long sip and then set the cup down on the saucer with the precise, careful motion of a person who used small physical rituals to organize her thoughts. Jacob. I want to tell you why I really came here this morning. Yes, ma'am. 18 months ago, my firm began due diligence on the Stellaris Group. The financials were attractive. The brand was attractive. The real estate alone was worth more than the offered acquisition price, which is part of why we were able to structure the deal the way we did. But there was one number, buried in the human resources data, that almost made me kill the deal entirely. She paused. Across the 47 properties, over the last 5 years, the company had paid out over $14 million in confidential settlements related to discrimination complaints. Guest discrimination. Employee discrimination. The kind of complaints that get filed, get investigated, get quietly resolved with a check and a non-disclosure agreement, and then disappear from the public record forever. Jacob set his coffee down. He hadn't taken a sip yet. $14 million, Jacob. In a company that, on the surface, prides itself on hospitality. On treating people well. That is a number that does not appear in any annual report. It does not appear in any marketing material. It does not appear in any of the rankings that put properties like this one on best of lists. But it is there, in the data, if you know where to look. Why didn't you kill the deal, ma'am? Because I realized something. If I killed the deal, the next buyer would simply continue the pattern. They would keep paying the settlements. They would keep signing the NDAs. They would keep covering it up. The money would keep flowing, the harm would keep happening, and nothing would change. The only way to change the pattern was to buy the company and break it from the inside. She picked up her coffee again. So I structured the deal. I assembled the financing. I closed at 6 o'clock this morning. And the very first thing I did, the very first action I took as the new owner of this company, was to walk into the lobby of the flagship property and see, with my own eyes, whether the pattern was as bad as the data suggested. Jacob was very still. It was, Jacob. It was exactly as bad. Within 4 minutes of walking into that lobby, I had been called a non-guest, refused service, and threatened with security. By the head concierge of our crown jewel property. In front of an empty lobby with no operational excuse. With a general manager whose only response, when she finally arrived, was to apologize to me rather than to defend the company's stated values. The pattern is real. The pattern is everywhere. And the pattern is going to be dismantled. Jacob swallowed hard. Ma'am. Why me? Catherine looked at him for a long moment. Because, Jacob, I needed to know if there was a single person in that lobby this morning who would do the right thing when it cost them nothing to do the wrong thing. The water bottle was a small gesture. It was almost invisible. You could have stayed at the bell stand, kept your head down, kept your job, and no one would ever have known you saw what was happening. But you didn't. You did the smallest, quietest, most decent thing that was available to you. And in doing so, you told me everything I needed to know about who you are. She set the cup down again. I am not promoting you because you are black, Jacob. I want to be very clear about that. I am promoting you because you are a person of character, and character is the rarest and most valuable resource any organization has. Your race did not cause your character. But your race did cause you to spend your entire life learning how to behave with character in environments that did not reward you for it. And that experience, Jacob, is exactly the experience this company needs, in this position, at this moment in its history. Jacob looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly. He drew in a long breath, held it, and let it out slowly. I won't let you down, ma'am. You will, Jacob. You will let me down many times in the next 90 days. And I will let you down. And we will both keep going. That is what real work looks like. Outside the windows, the golden light had begun to thin. Somewhere far below, in the lobby, the news was already spreading. By the time Catherine Brooks stepped out of the penthouse elevator at 1:15 that afternoon, the world had already changed. The video, recorded by the young woman on the velvet couch, had been uploaded to social media at 7:12 in the morning under the simple caption Beverly Hills Concierge tells black woman in workout clothes she doesn't belong. Watch what happens. By 9, it had 2 million views. By 11, it had 8. By the time Catherine sat down to her first lunch as chairwoman and CEO of the Stellaris Group, the video had crossed 23 million views, and every major news network in the country had picked up the story. The financial markets reacted in a way that almost no one had predicted. Conventional wisdom said that public scandals at luxury hospitality brands were always bad for the stock. Conventional wisdom, in this case, was wrong. The press release Catherine had preloaded for release at noon, the one that named Brandon Whitlock by name, that announced his suspension and pending termination, that named Jacob Reyes as acting general manager, and that committed the entire company to a public, transparent review of every discrimination settlement filed in the past decade, hit the wires at exactly 12 o'clock Pacific Time. Within 90 minutes, Stellaris stock had jumped 11%. Analysts struggled to explain it. The most honest of them said, on the record, that they had never seen a corporate response to a public crisis of this kind that had been this fast, this complete, and this credible. Investors, it turned out, had been waiting for a leader in the hospitality industry who would do exactly this. Catherine Brooks was the first one who had. The story took on a life of its own over the following days. Newspapers ran feature profiles of Jacob Reyes. His grandmother, the one who had taught him the rule about reminding people they were still human beings, was interviewed on 3 different morning shows. She told each interviewer the same thing. My grandson did not become a good man overnight. My grandson has been a good man his entire life. The world is just finally noticing. Yvonne Carter arrived at the Crown Stellaris Beverly Hills at 4 o'clock that afternoon. She walked into the lobby, set down her suitcase, looked Jacob Reyes up and down, and said, "We have a great deal of work to do, Mr. Reyes, and very little time to do it in. Get your notepad." They worked together every day for the next 90 days. By the end of those 90 days, the position became permanent. Jacob Reyes, 22 years old, became the youngest general manager in the entire history of the Stellaris Group. Linda Pierce did not lose her job. She rose to the moment Catherine had given her, in the way that some people do when they finally understand that the thing they have been protecting is not worth what they thought it was worth. She partnered with Jacob with genuine humility. She personally reopened every old complaint file in the property's records. She personally called several of the guests who had filed complaints over the years and apologized to them, on her own behalf and on behalf of the company. Several of those guests cried on the phone with her. 2 of them returned to the hotel as guests, 6 months later, at her personal invitation. One of them, a Nigerian businessman who had been turned away 3 years earlier, eventually became a regular client. Brandon Whitlock served his 90 days. He reported to Jacob Reyes every morning at 6:30. He performed the work he was assigned without complaint, partly because he had nowhere else to go, and partly because somewhere in the middle of those 90 days, something began to shift in him. Whether it was real change or simply the recognition that his old way of being in the world had become impossible, no one could say for certain. On the 89th day, his termination was processed exactly as Catherine had said it would be. He left the property at 5 o'clock that afternoon, in his own clothes, carrying a single small box. No one walked him out. No one applauded. No one said anything cruel. He simply walked through the revolving doors and out into the late afternoon light, and the doors revolved closed behind him, and that was the end of his career in hospitality. The $14 million in old settlements was not the end of the story. Catherine ordered a complete public accounting of every confidential settlement in the company's history. She voluntarily released the parties from their non-disclosure agreements. She invited every former complainant to come forward, on the company's dime, and tell their story if they wished. Some did. Some did not. The ones who did received personal letters of apology from Catherine herself, accompanied by a financial gesture that was not framed as a settlement but as a restitution. The total cost was approximately $22 million, paid out over 18 months. The Stellaris stock, over those same 18 months, doubled. A year after the morning in the lobby, Catherine Brooks stood at a podium at the Wharton School of Business and gave a lecture to a packed auditorium of MBA students. She told them the story of the morning at the Crown Stellaris. She told them about the water bottle. She told them about Jacob Reyes, who was now sitting in the front row in a charcoal suit, having just delivered the keynote that preceded hers. She told them about the $14 million in hidden settlements, and about the $22 million in restitution that had followed. And then she said something that would later be quoted in 100 business school case studies. The most expensive thing a company can do, she said, is protect the people who damage its values in order to preserve the people who deliver its quarterly numbers. the cheapest thing a company can do is the opposite. The math, my friends, has always been simple. It is only the courage that is rare. She paused, and looked out at the auditorium. Be the rare thing. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button if you believe character is something the world is finally beginning to notice. And subscribe, because there are more stories of quiet courage waiting to be told. Yours might be the next one.